Hey, before we start, we want to give a big thank you to our newest Patreon supporter, Faith. Your contributions help make Partum the Mess possible, so thank you. Welcome back to Partum the Mess, a podcast about humorous, inspirational, and educational experiences presented by first-time parents trying to navigate parenthood and staying sane doing it. I'm your host, Brittany, and today's guest is TJ. This is episode 10, and today we'll catch up with you and then have TJ share his thoughts and experiences being a first-time dad. I'll go ahead and start. Recently, my kids have been kind of smacking their face. A few episodes back, I believe it was episode 5, I was referencing how Buddy was smacking his head on the ground, and I wasn't sure what he was doing. I still don't know if it was just being frustrated. I know that Jamie's too young to really move on his own at all, so you probably haven't seen that in him, but have you seen that in kids before, like smacking their head on the ground or on the wall or anything?
I feel like that is I have a feeling
Okay.
that I have seen this, and that it is a common thing or more common for boys to do than for girls to do.
That's interesting.
But I could not give you a source on that or state where I heard it. I just feel like I used to be around kids a lot when I was a teenager. I babysat a lot, and I can't think of a time in which I've seen a girl smack her head on the floor or against the wall, but I have seen plenty of boys. They think it's funny. They like the sensation of being hit, which is weird. So with Jamie, he enjoys, when you burp your kid, he doesn't respond well to light taps,
Like on his back or something?
On his back, yeah. When you're trying to burp him on his back, I feel like I'm hitting him really hard, but that's when he's just quiet and happy.
Yeah.
So I don't know. There may be something that has to do with just some portion of a child. I mean, it's stimulating, right? I mean, You're stimulating nerves. You're stimulating. There's they don't hit their heads often, hopefully.
Right. Not often.
When they're babies, you're very careful with their heads, and maybe it's just sort of I haven't had the sensation before, so I'm going to keep doing it until they are okay, well, I understand what the sensation is like now, so maybe.
Yeah, Buddy usually does it when he's frustrated, but Swiss has been smacking her head in happy times. It's almost like because Buddy's been doing more peekaboo style, he'll cover his eyes, less smacking, just covering, and then he laughs when we pull away. Obviously, he's not talking yet. Well, not obviously to our listeners, just you know him. Anyway, yeah, I would believe it that it's a sensation thing. And I remember when they were in the hospital, them saying, you need to pat him hard. And we felt like we were going to break him. And so,
yeah, that's why I feel I'm going to kill my kid.
Yeah.
Luckily, my Jamie's pretty large. So I don't feel when you go to hug somebody who's really thin, you're I'm going to crack you.
Oh, yeah.
He doesn't feel like I'm just going to shatter him,
right?
Which I guess is good.
Yeah, it's good, I guess, to an extent, as long as depending what you're doing. If you're going in a 4-wheel or something, or whatever.
Yeah, I don't know. It just that patting, that sensation, they just appreciate the stimulation, I guess.
Yeah,
that'd be my guess anyway.
Yeah. So is there anything new going on at your house? I know that you guys have been really great coming to do the podcast, and you've been really great to lend Jess to us for all of these weeks and episodes. And so you're home, and you might talk about this more later, so you can tell me if you don't want to talk about this now. But do you feel like your duties are pretty well divided? When she's gone, it's not too chaotic because, you feel like you're able to manage?
Yeah, I guess. I don't have a problem with taking care of children. I grew up being a babysitter for my church, so
yeah,
I've never felt like there was a problem in that regard. Chaotic, no. I mean, I could see with twins, it could be a little chaotic.
Yeah.
But no, I've never felt things are chaotic. I mean, when he gets cranky, he's cranky, but there's nothing that I feel like can't can't be handled, you may just have to listen to him cry for 10 minutes or 15 minutes.
Yeah.
But it's not. Yeah, I encourage her to go places, to do things outside, because I want her to feel like, and I think she does, I hope she does, that I can take care of our children. I really don't want to be the dad who's comes home and sits on the couch and says, "Bring me a sandwich." That's not the type of person I want to be, and that's never the person I ever imagined myself being. I've always imagined that I've always been good with kids. I've always been told I've been good with kids, and I would just want to continue to be good with kids. And so I want to take care of Jamie as much as possible by myself. Like when I come home, and depending on how her day is, most of the time, I feel, I could be wrong, she'll correct me, that I come home and I take Jamie from her, and then I take him downstairs and I make dinner while she gets some alone time.
Yeah. Well, that sounds consistent from what she's told me.
Okay. So that's sort of my goal, is to make sure that I'm fully aware that when I'm at work, she's also at work.
Yeah.
And I think it was easier because we came from an environment in which we were working full time, both of us. So when we both came home, we couldn't just assume the other one would do something because we both just got home.
Yeah.
And I think that mentality has actually helped assist me in sort of, okay, well, when I get home, she's also been working all day, so I want to help her in having some time as well.
That's so great. Is there anything that you wish you would have known, that you like, something that you've experienced now that you wish you would have known, like, at the beginning? There's just, for example, like, there's a lot of things that Phil and I, not related to kids, that might come across, like, in creating this podcast. We think, oh my gosh, if we would have known about this X amount of weeks ago, we would have done it then. And some things you can't know until you know. But, with having a child, like, we're first-time parents too, so for you, is there anything that you can think of that you're experiencing now that you think, well, gee, if we would have come across this X amount of weeks ago, we would have been happier campers?
I will say not yet. I would guess that there will be something. I don't know. I'm quite scientifically minded. I don't know if that's the right word to use, but when looking at a cause and effect, I'm always extremely wary.
Okay.
So even if, like, we gave him, like, what Jess tried gripe water the other night, right? And that might be, if we continue to do that and it makes everything better, yay, gripe water. But I can't even do that because I'd be like, well, maybe it wasn't the gripe water. It could have been something else. Maybe he grew out of it at the same time. Maybe it did help, but so I guess, unfortunately, my answer to the question is, it's unlikely that I will ever come to the conclusion that I'm like, if we just known about this prior. And I guess that part of that comes from knowing so much about kids already.
Right.
That I don't feel there's anything that the kid is going to throw at me that I'm going to be surprised by.
Right.
I do have a degree in psychology, and part of that is child psychology. So coming at it, and having babysat kids for years as a teenager, I just don't feel there's going to be something that's going to jump out at me and be like, if I had only known how to deal with this earlier. The thing that, away from babies, actually about myself, the thing that I wish I had solved earlier was, I don't want this to sound bad, but anger. Like, I wouldn't say I have an anger issue.
I just want to interject. We spend a lot of time with them, and I feel like if you had an anger issue, it'd be, like, really evident. So that's not what he means. I think I understand what you mean, but just for our listeners, that's not an issue as far as I can tell.
Well, you don't know me. No, I'm kidding.
It's true. Jess will hear this later. She'll confirm tonight.
No, I have, like, when people I love or things I love are threatened, I get extremely defensive about it.
Mm-hmm.
And when it comes to fight or flight in those circumstances, my body wants to fight. And even when fighting isn't necessarily going to do anything, such as my kid is crying out in pain,
right,
and my body reacts in the I want to stop and beat up whatever this thing that's causing my kid pain, feeling wise, not actually doing it, but there's nothing I can do about that. Like I can't beat up his gas bubbles in his stomach.
Right. That might help if you push him through.
Yeah, I don't, let me reach down. So I guess just things like that, I'm a very, in general, calm person. But there are things that for some reason will upset me, and I'm generally fine. But then if they upset me again and again and again and again, occasionally I won't use the word snap because that has a very negative connotation, but it finally comes to the surface.
Yeah.
And cognitively, I can look back and say, this is ridiculous. Or even at the time of me being upset, I'm like, this is stupid.
Right.
Why am I mad at this video game? Or why am I, it's just something that I understand is not worth being angry at. And if I had figured out how to solve that prior to having a kid, because we all know kids don't stop when you want them to stop.
Yeah. Dang it.
You can't just turn them off. So yeah, on occasion I will have this boil to the surface and I'm just like, there's nothing I can do. Why am I going into this fight sensation? And I want to fight something and there's nothing I can fight. And it, you have this sensation of like, well, this is the thing. And it's like, well, I'm not mad at my kid.
Right.
It's
more of like upset at,
I'm just
generally
upset
at the
general situation,
yeah.
But the kid is there.
Yeah.
And I just wish that, sometimes I had learned how to calm myself down or just not be as affected by anger, because it just becomes this weird, like, I'm angry. Well, that's stupid. I shouldn't be angry. So now I get angry at being angry.
It's like a cycle.
Yeah, just this stupid cycle of being upset. And it's not, it's not like I'm punting my kid or anything. I'm not taking it out on my child, but it's just a physical and mental reaction that I feel is not healthy for me. And I would have been a better person, better husband, better parent had I understood how to better control that emotion, I guess. And so, yeah, it's still obviously a work in progress.
Well, thank you for sharing about that. We will go ahead and transition to your quote unquote story, and I'll have some questions that can help direct it, but feel free to take it any direction that you feel like would be helpful, because our goal here is to help all parents, but particularly fathers, recognize that there's other fathers out there who may have experiences like them. And I'm just going to speculate for a minute, and you're free to give any contrary opinions if this isn't what you've observed. Cody, Jessica, and I were talking about how this is kind of an, I guess, era of a change in fatherhood practice, I guess, or behaviors, and maybe not across the board, but compared to maybe the prior generations. I wonder if you feel that your parenting style is different than the way that your father parented.
I think I have a couple things to say about that. One, I don't have a good comparison because I can only remember till I was about 5. And the type of parenting that you get at that age is very different than the parenting you get prior to that.
Sure.
And Jamie is not 5 yet, unless you're listening to this in the future. So
cue the Twilight Zone music.
Yeah. So no, it's copyrighted.
Oh yeah, sing it.
So I guess I could say, looking at the future, I've actually thought about this a lot with my dad specifically, but in a general concept, a general idea, I think when I go back and I look at that cognitive dissonance that I have, that I want to be a good dad and I feel I'm a good dad, therefore anything that shows that I'm not the perfect dad makes me upset. I'm aware of all of that, and I'm aware of those feelings, and I've always been a very aware person of feelings, and I think that men sharing and showing those feelings is very important. And whereas I think a generation ago, it was, psychology was still this very, I mean, it's still a soft science. I mean, that's the definition
Right.
of psychology, but it wasn't as recognized as it was today. But with parenting specifically, I think it was much easier for dads specifically in that generation. I'm not saying my dad fits into this necessarily, but it was much easier to feel like I'm a good dad if I do X.
You're saying before, like you're saying this
before,
is maybe mentality.
Yeah.
Okay, right.
Yeah. So a generation ago, the mentality is, I'm a good dad if I provide for my family.
Right.
Or I'm a good dad if I pick up my son once a day or so, whatever it is. And I think that has shifted to understand how important father figures are. And I think this generation is far more in tune with their feelings than the previous generation. And I think that's going to definitely affect parenting in some way. Now, I said that I wouldn't necessarily lump my dad into that category because I realized just recently that how supportive my parents have been of really anything I've wanted to do. But as a kid, I didn't realize it.
Yeah.
So I've always sort of had this weird, like, I know it's really stupid, but we went backpacking and we were canoeing down a river and it was my birthday, but no one acknowledged it was my birthday. My dad was there and he didn't acknowledge it was my birthday. And I know that's now looking back, that's a really stupid thing to get stuck in your head, but obviously I remembered it.
Right. I have times like that are still stuck with me.
Yeah. And I want to say that, I'm going to be different. I'm going to be a better dad. Obviously, I can't prove that at this point. But looking back, I go, actually, my dad was a pretty good dad. I just think that it's so much easier to remember the negative things unless your dad was always there.
Right.
At all times. And when I think about that, obviously, as a kid, you're like, well, why wasn't he there? It's like, well, he had a life. Like, like, looking at how I want to be as a dad, how do I reconcile having my own life but also being a dad? And that's really difficult. So I think as far as my dad parented me, he's a decent role model, if not a good one. I mean, I don't have anybody else to compare to.
Sure.
So, and obviously I have a faulty memory about how things went down, but I do remember him being very supportive and wanting to see. He got interested in abalone diving, and it sounded really interesting to me. And I went on a couple of practice things, and he bought us all wetsuits. Then I did tennis, and I really liked tennis, and I was pretty good at tennis. So he comes home one day and he's bought himself a racket, and he bought me a racket. And no, I'm not talking $15 rackets from Target, They were nice rackets. I got into Magic the Gathering, the card game, and he takes me down to the store and he's talking to obviously it was super embarrassing at the time because this little guy already has a deck. So I'm looking for one. Super embarrassing, but looking back, I'm like, he's just being supportive. And so he bought a deck and we played Magic together. He wasn't that invested in it. He wasn't super interested. I mean, he wanted to be, but it just wasn't something that caught his attention, but he still tried. And I think that's something that I want to carry over to Jamie.
That's great. So you have things you're looking forward to with Jamie and any future children, and you've had some things you've been able to reflect on with your parents and ways that you hope to parent. And, you've talked about like the dissonance that sometimes you feel between what you hope to be and what you maybe are feeling like you're being currently. Some of what you've described about like how you feel, you've probably thought about for a long time, like well before you got pregnant. I mean, your family got pregnant.
No, we're following the Arnold Schwarzenegger, that little
Junior?
cavity. Yeah. See, you got it.
Yeah. Do you want to talk about you and Jess's? So she's shared her experience, her perspective, but do you want to talk anything about like from when you were married or even before you got married, what your thoughts were on or hopes with parenthood or expectations, anything related to that?
Sure. So we are approaching 11 years being married, and we just got pregnant. We didn't. We just had our kid, so we got pregnant a while ago. You know how it works. So
it all kind of, if you're like me, it all feels like the present. I don't know, like everything happened just in the present.
Yeah.
Like it doesn't feel like my kids are over a year and I feel like they were just born.
Yeah.
So I mean, mentally it's hard to separate
right.
it.
So during that whole time, we never used protection or attempted to prevent pregnancy the entire time, aside from the times in which we were on a medication in which we needed to prevent pregnancy because it could damage the pregnancy. So I guess from my perspective, because you've heard my wife's at this point, my perspective was if it was going to happen, I would be okay with it. I didn't necessarily want it to happen probably in the first few years of marriage. And I'm glad it didn't looking back because our relationship hadn't matured enough. We met each other in high school. We started dating in college and we got married by...
What are we, 22?
23? 23.
Like 11 years ago. Is that?
Yeah. Yeah, let's just calculate it backwards. So, just all accounts and purposes, we were in California. So I guess not early by Utah standards. But in California, that's relatively early to be getting married. And it wasn't that I didn't want to have kids. I just felt like we weren't in a place to actively go out and seek it.
Sure.
So, yes, we didn't use protection. Yes, we didn't. I hate that word, protection. Protect myself from pregnancy just feels odd to me. But
like it's
whatever.
Bad and evil or whatever.
Anyway, that's a different topic. So I didn't ever feel like I didn't want to like stop it, but at the same time, I had a feeling like it wasn't like we didn't want to go out and go to a doctor and you solve this right now. We need to figure out what it is.
Like you weren't being proactive to try to create
it wasn't
that.
we didn't want
situation.
Exactly. And I was more or less okay with that. Like I knew I wanted to be a dad. I knew I've always wanted to be a dad, but it was sort of that not necessarily not being ready for it, but just feeling like I would rather, if I had a choice, I would rather be in it. Cause I think when we first got married, I was working at Target and she was working as a receptionist at a doctor's office, both very low paying jobs. And bringing a child into it wasn't necessarily like oh no, well then we'll have to figure something out. It was the paying money to then maybe have a child to then pay more money. Like it was just like the culmination of being proactive costs so much.
Right. Like if it's not happening naturally, being proactive. Yeah,
exactly. So that was sort of where I was at. And then we got to a point where, I mean, and actually dealing with Jess having to, because she's wanted to be a mom for forever. And I think she really would have liked having a kid earlier. I mean, this may be counter to what she says in her story, but she wanted to be motivated to she was motivated to have a child. I wasn't motivated to have a child, but if it happened, I would be happy about it. Right. So there just was that dissonance and discord, that slight discord in the marriage in which she felt like I wasn't supporting it. Well, I wasn't not supporting it. I just wasn't being actively supporting it.
Right.
I didn't want to bring up having kids too often because maybe then that she gets too excited about it and then she pushes to do more about it. It's like, well, so now I stop talking about it altogether. Then I look like, so there was this whole weird dynamic between us, which it probably took 5 years to sort of understand each other. And this whole time we've had her sister. So we were already taking care of a teenager, and bringing in a kid when you're dealing with a teenager was rough on its own. And I didn't want to, let's go make our lives even harder.
Like
on
who would
purpose.
choose to do that kind of, like who in their quote unquote right mind?
Yeah, right. It's sort of just like, hey, at this point we would have to actively choose to have a baby. And I guess I just wasn't there yet.
Right.
where she was. And so going through this whole process, again, I had like 5 years. And then there was another couple years where I honestly couldn't tell you when we started being proactive about it. I want to say it was 3 to 5 years ago. So that was interesting to sort of be proactive in a different way. We weren't taking Clomid. We weren't taking medication to get pregnant. So she has PCOS. So getting medications to sort of handle that and get that under control and figure out how to deal with that was sort of a big deal for a few years. And I guess my whole view was I am fine being proactive and adopting, or like I'm fine doing all that if we get to a point where we should have a child naturally and it doesn't work.
Yeah.
I got to a point where I was fine with that. And in fact, I was very excited for it. At this point, I really wanted a kid.
This kind of reminds me of what you're saying earlier, like the scientific mindedness. You want to see, like, let it work itself out.
Right.
You know?
Yeah. I always have this, like, as far as kids go, I'm really big. I mean, I'm scientifically minded, but I also think science has done a lot of negative things in the past. Like if you look at giving pills to stop milk production, so because you can just give them formula. Obviously that's not what they push today, but I'm very wary of how science pushes because I feel like I have a slightly deeper understanding of how pharmaceuticals work due to some of the classes I took in college, and I dislike it a lot. So I'm all about, I want things to happen naturally. If it doesn't work that way, I'm not against medications, but I push everything should be natural to a point in which you feel medical intervention needs to happen.
Right.
So we were pushing this, okay, let's get the PCOS because that's what's preventing the natural pregnancy in theory. So if we just get a handle on that, we'll see what happens. Well, years pass and I've sort of gotten to the point where, I don't know, subconsciously I've come to the conclusion that we're just not going to be pregnant. And I don't know if that was a benefit or not, but when she finally lets me know she has a box full of like 10 pregnancy tests because like she had sort of also gotten to the point where she felt like we weren't going to get pregnant.
Right.
So it was kind of funny. And I see it. I'm like, what is she showing me? Is she showing me that she wants to? These say positive, like it wouldn't click. Like I wasn't in denial.
Just wasn't registering what you were
registering because
context.
it just, I had subconsciously come to the conclusion that we wouldn't get pregnant.
Right. So whose are these, Jess?
Yeah.
Why are you showing me? It's
Yeah.
gross.
Is Brittany pregnant again?
Yeah.
And so it's just one of those interesting moments of slow realization. I mean, I say slow, it was probably like 5 seconds or less, you know?
Sure.
But just like, oh, wait, we're actually pregnant. But I have this thing where I don't really get excited.
Like you don't feel excited or you don't express it?
I don't get excited very often about a lot of things. So in that moment, I wouldn't say that I was excited. And Jess knows this. This happens every year for Christmas. She'll give me something and I'm like, oh, great, thank you. And
she
then
can see through it.
Yeah. And then, I mean, you were there when she gave me crouton.
Right, yeah.
Like I was like, oh, thanks. Like my mind just goes a mile an hour trying to figure out, okay, well, can we afford this? Can we do this?
Yeah, like how to feel.
So I'm not excited, but then like an hour later I break down crying and I'm like, oh my gosh, I have a dog. It's the best thing ever. Right. So it just happens almost every year. She'll give me something and I'm like, okay, I try to be excited because that's what you're supposed to do. But it's not until later that I like, oh, I do enjoy this thing.
Yeah.
So I try to be as supportive as possible when we find out I'm pregnant, because I just don't get excited, but I'm happy.
Right.
But happiness doesn't always portray or show as well as an excitement.
Right. And I can think of a lot of times that's been that way in my life, and I think that's not a bad thing always.
Right. I mean, you just sort of see movies and you see like, we're pregnant. Oh, and everyone jumps for joy. And we have some friends and they like, when they found out they're the very boisterous type. So they oh, everyone's crying and waving their hands and oh my gosh, and hugging and squeezing. And the way I handle that quote unquote excitement is just an internal more peace.
Right.
Like, oh, okay, yeah. So I try to express that a little bit more. But
you mean you tried at this time?
Yeah, I tried, at this time to show a bit more, and it never felt real. And I know
being pregnant
never felt real.
Like through the entire pregnancy, didn't it?
Like the entire pregnancy.
Yeah.
Like I always joked about, oh, this is just a ruse that you're, I didn't actually believe that,
Sure.
but that was a running gag that, oh, she got the doctors on board. That's somebody else's.
She is conniving.
Yeah. She's very intelligent. She really is. She could have pulled this off. I guarantee you. I don't know if that's a backhanded compliment or.
Oh, I think it's a straightforward compliment.
Yeah. So yeah, it was just sort of one of those things where, I mean, we're there looking at our kid, and I just still don't feel like in a sonogram.
Oh, right.
And I still don't feel like, I'm like, it still doesn't feel, because it's been 10 years of trying, and I just don't feel like it can happen. And still to this day, I like look at him like, wait, this wasn't a joke. We actually have it. We brought the baby home. And I think that sentiment is shared by a lot of dads. What's the old saying that a woman becomes a mom when she gets pregnant?
Mm-hmm.
A guy becomes a dad when he sees the baby.
Yeah, like in real life is what I think the saying is implying.
Yeah,
not just on the
right in real life.
Yeah,
holding the baby, and I was lucky enough that I was the first one to actually hold the baby, and he laid on me and stayed on me for several minutes, and I sang him songs. I wrote him a song. I'm like, I'm going to sing this when he comes.
Oh, that's awesome.
When he first comes out, and so that was the first song he ever heard, which is kind of cool. And it was nice to sort of feel that connection and feel like he is real. He is here, even though sometimes I'm just, I don't know. I don't know if anybody else feels this way. I'd like to think they do, but like when you first get married, you're like, hey, wife. Giggle. Wow, we're married. What does that mean? Oh my gosh, this is huge.
We totally felt that way.
Yeah. And so I just feel like the same way about having a baby is just it doesn't feel big until you look at him and then you're all of a sudden, wow, this is huge.
Yeah. It's for us, we have those moments. Even occasionally Phil will say, we have twins. And we go, oh my gosh. Yeah. It's been over a year, right? And they still say that. And so I mean, I understand that it's at least shared with us, that sentiment we at least can relate to.
Right.
Well, thank you, TJ. With that, we will wrap up this episode. We really appreciate you coming and sharing your experiences. Like I said at the beginning of this episode, we want parents to feel like other parents can relate. And so we appreciate you being willing to share your experiences. And maybe you can tell me, as a person, does it buoy you up or give you any kind of extra confidence or strength when you know other dads feel similar, or are you kind of like an island and it doesn't really affect you how other people feel?
To quote Simon and Garfunkel, I am a rock. Yeah, so I'm more of that island. I feel like just based off of how other men have told me and how they've talked to me, I feel like I'm quite different than your average guy in that, I mean, just as a random example, I had almost every single, like 99% of people who talked to me, men, all said that they were thankful to get back to work after taking time off.
Oh my gosh.
And I just can't understand that. If I could spend all day, every day with my wife and child, I would. But it's always been that way. Like if I could spend time with my wife, I will take that over working anytime. I don't understand or grasp that sentiment. So I feel like how others believe or how others act or how others feel doesn't actually affect me much at all. And it may be because I feel like I'm different often in a group of guys they'll all be talking or all be excited about something or all be discussing something, and it's just not something that interests me, or it's not something that I can relate to. I've learned how to engage when necessary, but ultimately when I hear how other guys feel, it feels like, I'll be like, oh, that's good that you're feeling that way. Doesn't necessarily relate to me in any way.
Yeah.
Or that's bad that you're feeling that way, but I can't say that because then you'll be mad at me. There's just so many. I can't think of any off the top of my head that really occur to me. But yeah, you think that sometimes hearing how somebody reacts to a certain situation, and you're like, oh, well, I reacted the same way. I understand. I feel for the most part, I don't react the same way. And so talking to other people just hasn't felt engaging. But I think that may change.
Yeah.
Because there are times when I'll talk about now, most of the people I'm around all have young kids. And I try to relate to them because I've had 10 years taking care of a teenager.
Right. And you've known her for a long time.
Right.
Right. Most of her life, if not
yeah,
all of it.
I think I met her when she was 6 or something. No, wow, 4 or 5. Yeah, long time. Definitely most of her life. So you just have this trying to relate and share how that felt. I felt like I wanted to share it, and I could relate and understand other people because of those experiences. But I think that because it wasn't my own child, other people didn't feel like I actually did relate.
Yeah.
So I feel like it wasn't necessarily me an island because I'm so different from you, but I'm trying to say I do understand, but they don't feel like I do. And I'm like, yeah, come talk to me in 10 years when you have a teenager and
right.
we'll talk then.
Right.
But yeah, I think just having this realization right now.
You heard it here first.
That it's not necessarily that I'm so different, but that I feel like when I attempt to relate, I don't do it in a way that makes people feel like I'm actually relating to them.
Well, I suspect that as people hear this episode, if they have similar feelings, they'll be able to tell, like, that you can relate. I mean, I feel like you've conveyed what you're saying well, and so I appreciate you being so open and willing to talk about that, because sometimes it's hard if you suspect people don't feel the same way, and so I just really appreciate your candor today. So with that, we'll transition to our recipe section, because as always, nobody wants to plan a meal every single night. Sometimes it even makes us cry. So today I've got the recipe, and this week I made ramen noodles, and I don't mean the 25 cents, if that's even what they are anymore, version. It was a homemade version. I eat pretty strictly gluten-free diet, and the noodles and everything in our home are gluten-free. And so the recipe that I'll post will be the one that I followed. I just made this up, but I will share with you the recipe for the sauce that I followed, and I'll link that to the website where I got it. But the sauce is called Awesome Sauce for ramen noodles, and I'll tell you about that in just a minute. But what I like to put on my ramen noodles, I make the noodles separately, but then I cook chicken, and you can season it however you want. But I cook up some chicken. I cooked it in the wok, and then I top it with a hard-boiled egg, which is a must. I've had that my whole life.
You have to.
I mean, is it even ramen without a hard-boiled egg? Yeah.
Well, and you go soft-boiled, and you get a whole new experience.
Yeah, and I have a recipe pinned on Pinterest for soft-boiled, and I'm not sure I'm ready for that experience. Although I like fried eggs with the yolk running, so I don't know what my problem is with that. But I put garlic, and then I sauteed, or walked, I guess. I don't know that sauteed is the right word. I walked garlic and onion in with my chicken. Oh, and I had peas as well. So kind of sounds like a hodgepodge, but it worked for us. And then we did the awesome sauce, which if you're a healthy, clean eater, this is not for you. This one is delicious, but it's a little bit on the sweet side. It's one that I used and liked, but I don't know that I would say it's my favorite. But the sauce ingredients are soy sauce, sesame oil, which I really like, brown sugar, granulated garlic, onion powder, red chili powder, sesame sesame seeds, and parsley. If you try out the awesome sauce and you like it, let us know. But if you have another recipe that you like for sauce, I'm always looking for it. Just as a side note, I don't want anything with fish oil. Thanks.
You mind if I jump in?
Yeah.
So you mentioned what you like putting on ramen. I would add, yes, definitely a hard boiled. You could even do, like, if you do a string scrambled egg through it, so that you just stir it as you slowly pour scrambled egg into it, and it creates these strings of egg, is really good.
Yeah.
But green onion.
Oh yeah.
And or bok choy. Those are my two absolutely favorite toppings on ramen.
Well, thanks for your contributions as well to that. I like making ramen because it's kind of like stir fry. You can mess it up, I guess, if you don't like it, but that's about it.
It's pretty hard. It's pretty hard to mess it up.
Yeah. It's kind of open to adaptation. So be sure to catch our next episode where our guest will be a doula, and she will share some insights about remaining calm during pregnancy and some coping techniques. Also, please check us out at our website, partumthemess.com, and on Instagram and Twitter at Partum the Mess. Join us next week and Partum the Mess.
We're making memories.